Hello everybody, welcome to my channel. If you don't know my channel, I call myself a social scientist, but I am a business psychologist and a clinical mental health counselor. Specifically, I work with childhood trauma right now, so that is those are my specialties. So today in this video, I'm going to be talking about how to deal with toxic workplaces. I've listed my top 6 things that I think make a toxic workplace and how to deal with those things, like either from my own experience or things that other people have told me about how they deal with those experiences and how they kind of survive those workplaces, or how they work to change the culture in those workplaces. Okay, so I'm going to start from number 6. Number 6 is cliques. A cliquey workplace can be pretty damaging to the work culture and make people feel unwelcomed, but it's also damaging to people who are in the cliques as well, because they're not really fully experiencing getting to know their other coworkers. And also I've noticed, especially working with certain groups of people, that some people are more cliquey than other kinds of people. So I think I don't want to say extroverts have a tendency to be more cliquey. That's not true, because there are some extroverts who don't like cliques and they are friends with a lot of different people. And the same with introverts. So I guess it's really not a personality thing as far as like extrovert versus introvert goes. But it is more like there are some people who are more prone to being in a clique, and there are people who are more prone to being not in a clique. So if you're a person who is not cliquey at all, like if you look back in high school or middle school and you can name several groups of people that you were friends with, then that's great. In a workplace that is cliquey, it might be really, really hard for you to adapt to and feel comfortable in. So some tips for you might be to, first of all, don't get sucked into the clique. I don't think that cliques are helpful. I think they're very damaging in the workplace, like I mentioned. So you want to keep that personality that you have that is social with everybody, or likes to befriend or get to know everybody, not just a certain group of people. But you also want to make sure you're not excluding the clique. You want to make sure that you are also engaging with members of the clique, if they're open to that. If they're just like rude and mean and they don't want to talk to you at all, then don't bother with it. That's not going to help your mental health. But if they're open to talking to you and getting to know you a little bit, then that's fine. For me personally, I'm not a cliquey person at all. I can't stand cliques. So when I'm in a workplace that is very cliquey, I kind of keep to myself and I just do my job, and I'm nice to people, and I just do general getting to know you stuff. Like, I don't talk too much about my personal life, because in my experience with cliques, if you pay close attention to them, it seems like a lot of them are not very happy with their own lives for some reason, and for whatever reason they're getting some kind of fulfillment out of being in this clique. It gives them some kind of identity, some place to belong. I don't know what it is, but they get something out of it. We don't do things if we're not getting some kind of gratification out of it. So with that being said, I don't really trust sometimes people that are in cliques, because I've noticed that if you're not in their clique, if you're not in their in-group, and you tell them information about yourself, they may use that later to, throw in your face. I don't know. Like, for me personally, when I was in graduate school, was very protective over the fact that I was in graduate school, because I had jobs where you didn't have to have even like a graduate degree. I was making money to, pay my bills and live my life. And, I didn't tell people that I was in graduate school until I felt I could trust them a little bit. And what I mean by throwing it in my face is like, maybe somebody gets angry with me and will say like, well, you think you know everything because you're in graduate school, or because you're in school, or you're getting a PhD, or, oh, you should know this, or you shouldn't have made that mistake because you're getting a PhD. Things like that. Things like that, they do happen. I mean, nobody ever did that to me, actually, but in my brain I was thinking, people might do that. So I just was very protective of that information. So anyways, for you, you might want to also be protective of some information about yourself. You maybe not want to tell them all about your life, because people especially in cliques, will use that amongst themselves to somehow manipulate or, I don't know, throw in your face later, I don't know. But that's just for me how I survived in a cliquey work environment before. But also the thing to know about cliques is that they're individual people that make up the group. So if you take the time to get to know and be kind to the individual people, eventually you'll find that the clique is not a threat to you, and that they're just nice, you know, people. Like the workplace that I was just talking about just now, I took the time to get to know people, let them get to know a little bit about me, and before, you know, I knew it, you know, I didn't feel like I was an outsider, but I also didn't feel like I was part of their in-group either. I just felt comfortable, and that's where you want to be. You want to be in a place of comfort. And so eventually they did know that I was in grad school, and nobody threw it in my face, and it was fine. But, and maybe the little bit of that is like my own little social anxiety thing of keeping some things to myself. But yeah, that's a good tip, I think. If you are a cliquey person, or you have a tendency to find an in-group or create an in-group, then a good thing for you to consider is when new people come into your workplace, trying to be like the welcoming member of that in-group. There are cliques where they have people who are more welcoming than others, and that take the time to get to know outsiders, I would say. And you want to be that person because you want to make sure that you're making a work environment that is non-threatening and welcoming. So that's my number 6. Number 5, disrespectful bosses. So this is something that I'm still learning how to deal with, actually, but here's some good tips that somebody told me. Number 1, find your happy place. Keep your peace. Do not let them take your peace from you. So what that could look like for you is a lot of different things. Some people keep stress balls at work. Some people like a certain scent, like lavender, like oil or something like that. Or, yeah, like what is it called? Those diffusers that people get. Some people like light therapy. Also disclaimer, I am a therapist, but this is not mental health advice as far as like, it should not take the place of your therapist or actually going to seek therapy. I should say that in the beginning of the video. But anyways, these are just suggestions. Take them with face value because I am not evaluating you and I don't know what your personal issues are. But anyway, yeah, so light therapy. For example, I have a therapy light that I use for myself in the wintertime especially. And just because it gives me more energy. It's not like a depression thing, but it just gives me more energy. But some people may use it to help lift their mood a little bit. And it's really not that expensive. I'm pretty sure I paid $20-something for it on Amazon or something, but it's really good. That's one suggestion. For me, I like to put Bible verses in my cubicle at work, and just look at those, like Bible verses that help me when I get stressed out. So for you, it might be Bible verses or inspirational quotes or whatever. Pull them aside to talk to them about your communication style. Some people are abrasive and confrontational, and they don't notice it about themselves. And so if you pull them aside and you tell them, hey, when you talk to me like this, I don't like it. I would prefer that you say this instead, or say it this way or whatever. That is beneficial. So for example, I was an executive director in the past. I know that my emails are very like short and to the point with people. I don't like a lot of fluff in my emails, and so I don't write emails with a lot of fluff. I just can't. I mean, if I try and sit there and think about the fluff of an email, it'll take me an hour to write an email that should have taken me 5 minutes. So that's why I don't add fluff to my emails. So one time I had like volunteers who, they were really, it was kind of like, it was a nonprofit that I was an executive director of. So the volunteers that we had that lived on campus were like kind of a member of the staff almost, but they were like a volunteer position. And there were some issues. And so I laid out, I just told people in the email, we need to have a meeting or something. I don't remember exactly what I said. But in the meeting, somebody brought up to me, in my emails, I'm very like short, and it kind of seems like, abrasive and rude. But in person, when I'm talking to them, it's more engaging, I'm very friendly and non-threatening. And so that was helpful feedback for me, because I needed to realize that I need to talk to people differently through email. The tone of voice is different. If I'm telling you we need to have a meeting about something, if I write an email that says we are having a mandatory meeting tonight or tomorrow night at 5 p.m. If you're an employee or a volunteer or whatever, and you're reading that, you're probably thinking of all the things you might have done wrong in your head. In my head, all I'm thinking is, as a director, is we just need to have a meeting and talk. But that's not what they read. That's not what they interpret. And so I had to be very cognizant of that. So for me, I don't like writing emails when I'm like upset or angry. But anyways, you may not have a boss that is receptive like I am. However, try. Here's the thing. It's kind of like, I think Michael Jordan said this, like if you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, it's kind of like that. If you don't try to address it, it will never get addressed and the issue will continue. But if you try to address it, you have like a 50-50% chance of like them either ignoring you or actually taking what you say and trying to apply it to themselves as a leader. So, try. Pull them aside, let them know, hey, when you said this to me, it was embarrassing, and it made me think this or that or the other thing. I would appreciate it in the future if you would address me like this or that, or whatever. Let them know your communication style. So I kind of already said this, that the two go together. So yeah. Okay, that was number 5. Number 4. Poor communication or poor guidance from leaders. This is huge. Some people are not good communicators. Even leaders are not good communicators sometimes. So what I found to be helpful is to continue to clarify. So in therapy, one skill that we use when somebody tells us something about what they're thinking or how they're feeling is we just reiterate what they said. But maybe in a different way or in a way that I understood it. So like if somebody tells me, when my mother said this to me, it made me feel like I didn't belong anywhere. And so I might reiterate that in a way to say, so when your mother would say like mean words to you, it made you feel unloved or like you didn't belong. And then they can correct me and they'll, oh, I didn't say unloved. I guess I didn't really feel unloved, but I more felt like just lost. Doing that, like that piece of work, I mean, this is therapy talk now, but just redefining what somebody says in a way that you understood it helps them know where your train of thought is going and will give them the opportunity to correct you. If your boss tells you, I need you, okay, I'm going to use an office, like an example from The Office. When Jim had to like, what was that he told him to do? It was like, rundown. He told him to do a rundown. Do you have that rundown? Can you do a rundown of all your clients? And Jim was like, what the hell is a rundown? So it's like, it's a perfect example. Like in a boss's brain, a rundown might just mean like your quarterly stats. In Jim's brain, he's like, does he want the contacts? Does he want like the quarterly stats? Does he want like, my sales record? Like, what does he want? There's an opportunity for Jim right there to say, okay, when you say rundown, you mean you want my quarterly stats. And then he'll say, I mean, he was kind of a rude boss, so he might have just looked at him funny. But in real life, I feel like people would just define that for you, what they actually meant. So reiterate it in a way that you understand. Like, tell them what you are understanding them to ask you to do. And then that'll give them the opportunity to either correct you or to say, yes, that's exactly what I want. I do that quite a bit. And it's very important and it's very helpful to do because you'll end up spending time doing something that they didn't mean for you to do if you don't define what they wanted you to do. Okay. Number 3, Lack of support or training, or poor training. Okay, this is really a big one for me. It's a huge pet peeve to have terrible training. For me personally, this is something that I've heard at many places. It's like, well, if you don't know how to do something, ask a question. Okay, but that's good advice for when I know exactly what it is I want that I don't know. But if I don't know what I don't know, I cannot ask the question. So if I didn't know that I was supposed to be trained on X, Y, or Z, then I can't ask a question about X, Y, or Z because it's not in my brain. So that's why whenever I start training somewhere, I want a list of the places, of the things that we're going to be going over, because I don't want to be blamed later for having not been trained on it. Like, when leaders blame employees for not being trained on something, it makes me angry, because it's like it's your responsibility as a leader to make sure they get trained on that. So it is not their responsibility. It's like, it's as if, like, okay, you have a toddler or something and you don't explain the rule to them or something, and they break a rule, and then you're blaming the toddler, and it's like the toddler is still learning. The toddler didn't know that they're not supposed to do that because you didn't teach them. You're the parent. It's your fault. So that's the kind of the same thing. So when you have an organization that is bad at training people, or bad at onboarding, or just the training was really poor, then what you want to do is you want to write down the thing, like take note of the things when you're onboarded and when you're going through, when you're onboarded, that are bad. Like, take note of that. Think of solutions, bring them to your supervisor. As a previous supervisor, it is very frustrating when employees or volunteers even bring issues to you, but nobody has a solution to a problem. Even if you don't have a solution to a problem, if you just tell me, hey, I tried to think about a solution to this, I can't think of anything, but I thought I would bring it to your attention, that's much better than saying, oh, this isn't right, we shouldn't do it this way. You're frustrated, and it's adding frustration to your supervisor, and it's a frustrating situation. Take note of the things that you wish you were trained on, the things that you think you should have been trained a little bit better on, or that could have been improved, and the things that you think are like dark gray areas, or like blind spots in training when you're onboarded. And no training is going to be perfect, because it's really hard to train people, because you're basically trying to adapt a training model to all sorts of different learning styles, and it's very difficult. But it can help when people who are onboarded give feedback to their supervisor about, okay, this is the problem that I had when I was onboarded. The next person, we should do this, that, or the other thing. It's very, very beneficial. I think that most places are probably not very good at training, so your feedback is helpful. If you have a boss that is open to feedback, that's great. But in my experience, even the most difficult to work with bosses are open to feedback if you bring them also your suggested solutions. Okay, number 2. Hazardous work environments due to lack of policies or consistency with policy. So this is very big in the medical field, I think. Creating a hazardous workplace because policies are not followed. But even in office places where simple policies are not followed, it can be hazardous. So one thing that I would say is bring it to your supervisor. Say, hey, I noticed that we're not doing this, but the handbook says we should. And make suggestions as to why. So in my field as a business psychologist, my first thought whenever there's a situation, a mistake or an accident, is what happened to cause this issue? Okay, it probably has something to do with the policy either not being written or not being followed or not being well communicated to somebody. People don't usually break rules in the workplace because they just want to break a rule in the workplace. People don't usually cause an accident because they want to cause an accident. It's usually because of one of those 3 things. So the first thing that I do is I look at what was the situation, what were the circumstances. That will help me to then figure out what happened. Then I look at the policies or the procedures, and then I talk to somebody about how are these communicated to the workers. And I also compare the policy or procedures to the mistake or the incident and figure out where the gap is here. And then I talk about how it's communicated to the workers. How are they trained on it? Do they understand this? Does everybody have a copy of this policy, and was it communicated in training or a staff meeting or whatever? And this is the fourth and most important thing, what are the things that were put in place next so that this does not happen again? Because it happened because something was missing. And so now we have to make sure we have something in place to prevent that from happening again. So for an employee, when you notice something like that, you can bring it to your boss's attention. Like, okay, I'm noticing that this is a potential hazard, and here's what I'm thinking could be a solution for that. And nobody's better at figuring that out than you as an employee, because you do the work. You know what's safe and what is not safe. You know what is a realistic policy and what is just nonsense. You're doing the work. You know better than your boss what the hazards are and what you can possibly do as a team to prevent those things from happening. Number 1. Narcissistic bosses. I think narcissistic bosses are the most toxic things in the workplace because they create a workplace that exists solely to make them look good or praise them or make them, serve some kind of psychological need that they just are not getting elsewhere. So, how to deal with a narcissistic boss? In my opinion, it's kind of like dealing with a teenager or a toddler. At those stages of development, they're pretty egocentric. They only see the world from their point of view. And here's a good example of a boss that's pretty narcissistic. Oh my gosh, just think of The Office. That's a perfect one right there. D'Angelo was narcissistic. Michael Scott was narcissistic. How did the staff of The Office deal with those people? They treated them like children, and I don't mean that in don't be rude to your boss, obviously, but what I'm saying is here's a real life example that I had to deal with in the past. You have a boss who's who's complaining about a mistake that somebody made and going on and on and on about this mistake. Or how about we put you in the example? They're complaining about a mistake that you made. How could you make this mistake? You know better than that. Don't you have a master's degree in this stuff? Or didn't you work at blah, blah, blah? And what did they do there? I mean, how could you make this mistake? One way to deal with that, because this person who's saying all this stuff to you, they don't really actually want to know the truth. What they want to hear you say is this: you're right, I made a mistake. I am so sorry. I will make sure that it doesn't happen again. I will put into place practices that ensures that I don't make that mistake again. They don't want to hear the reasons why you made the mistake. They don't want to hear the circumstances that created the mistake. So I know it's contradictory to what I said earlier, but when you're dealing with a narcissistic boss, it's a little bit different. And I'm talking about a small mistake. I'm not talking about a huge mistake that caused somebody an injury. Then in that case, you definitely want to use what I said earlier. But a small, let's say you wrote a newsletter and you had a typo. So you have a type A narcissistic boss because this typo was completely unacceptable, right? So then you just say, okay, good example to do is say, I made a mistake. I apologize. In the future, I will put Grammarly on my computer, or I will log into Grammarly, make sure there's no typos, and then I will also proofread it and send it to a coworker to ask them to proofread it before I submit it to you. There's a good solution. Or there's a good response, because what you're doing is you are acknowledging your mistake, you're apologizing for it, and then you're coming up with a solution for the future. Some narcissistic bosses will be vindictive and say, no, you made this mistake, I can't trust you with this anymore, I'm gonna do it, or have somebody else do it. In that response, you just say, okay, I understand, and you move on with your day. It kind of goes back to number 5, where I said disrespectful bosses, keeping your happy place. What they want to do is they want to give you a rise because they feel like they have high blood pressure, they're upset about something, and they want to make you feel that way too. So don't let them make you feel that way. If they want to take away that responsibility from you and take it onto themselves or give it to somebody else, let them do that. That's fine. You've got other things to do anyway. Okay, so those are my top 6 toxic workplaces and how to deal with those things. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want to see more content like this video and subscribe. Thanks. Bye.